Hey there, good morning, and welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock and other forms of rock music. So I am going to do another episode of What is the Difference? Usually this one isn't one that I plan or I think too much about. Usually I get an inspiration and start thinking about it and then decide that, yeah, that indeed is something that should be shared with people. So that's what happened when I did the first one. That's what's happened today with this one. So we're going to do an episode of what is the difference, which will just talk about two different albums and why they're both great, but why they're both very different. And the two albums I've chosen to do today are these two, Tommy and Who's Next by The Who. They actually followed each other in succession. Very different albums though. But ultimately, they resulted in the same thing. Two great albums by one legendary band. So we'll talk about Tommy a bit first. So Tommy is the Who's masterpiece, the magnus opus of their career. Talking about a deaf, dumb, blind kid. This is considered one of the first, if not the first, concept album. I don't think it is the first concept, but maybe the Beatles... the Beatles album, which I'm drawing a blank on right now, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band might have been the first, and there also was one released by the Kinks called Arthur. But this one here had a huge impact, at least for the Who it did anyways, because up till this point they were near bankrupt and about to go out of business, some of their members trying out for other bands. But Pete Townshend put his masterpiece together here. And at this point, he then became a good writer. It went from a good writer to an absolute genius of a writer. The album is really great. It has so many things about it. They even went as far as writing the song Pinball Wizard for Nick Cohen's a writer for the New York Times, so he would give them a good interview, or give them a good review, I guess is probably the better thing. Whereas this album, which came out a couple of years later, Who's Next, is probably the album that kind of was a response to a failed Lighthouse concept album that Pete Townshend had been working on, but had a nervous breakdown to it and abandoned it, and then a lot of the songs ended up here on Who's Next, and you can hear the thunder going on in the background here. Anyways, for a failed attempt album, it certainly is considered among most, and most Who fans consider this to maybe be their biggest and best album. I certainly do. So what is the difference between these two albums? Okay, so other than the couple years of time and difference, the other difference is this one is a concept album. This is a failed concept album. This one is kind of got that 60s kind of popish heavy sound that was coming out late in the 60s, almost some psychedelia in here as well, but mostly a heavy pop album with a lot of real catchy beats, riffs, but not really any, other than Pinball Wizard, the rest of the songs are kind of attached to each other in a lot of ways. So I think the reason Pinball Wizard isn't really attached as much is because it was written for a specific purpose and really didn't have, was kind of fit into the storyline as opposed to being part of the storyline. Where this one is because it's a failed attempt at a concept album, and actually the remnants of a failed attempt of a concept album, it is much more, I guess, singular in that its songs are individual in a lot of ways, but some of the most classic Who songs are on this album. Bubba O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again, Behind Blue Eyes. Like it's just a almost a greatest hits album in many ways. Bargain. These are some of the best. My Wife, the John Entwistle track, so good. So this one is a much heavier album, much more of the time period of the 70s than the Tommy album, and I think it lends that rebellious attitude that the Who are so known for quite a bit here. Even the cover with them peeing on something in the open. They just had that rebellistic, don't give a shit attitude, which, I think endeared them to many people. Certainly to me, I liked the fact that they were outwardly anti kind of authoritarian group. Maybe a proto-punk band in some ways, Anyways, so for me, this album, the difference between these two albums, even though this one is a concept album, the instrumentation is a bit thin in some places. Basically, they use what they have to their own resources, their guitar, their bass, their drums, and not really I don't think there's any keyboards on here. I don't recall any. If I'm wrong, somebody will correct me. Sure. But the albums, because of that, the album sounds a little bit thin. Like there's not as much going on. There's a fair bit of empty spaces in it. But some catchy songs, but not as many as on this album. The difference, though, is this album sounds much more fuller, has a little bit more instrumentation on it. It's heavier. It's a lot more catchy riff sting. The songs, I think, are more singular, impressive than they are on Tommy, where they all seem to kind of fit together and need to be played as a whole. This can be played individually. This is much more appealing to me because I kind of got into rock in the 70s. This had a much more 70s sound to it than that, which was a little bit thinner. The album covers, vastly different. You got a very organized kind of great kind of look to this album, whereas on this one it's just a bunch of guys peeing on a wall. Sorry, my hand is a little on the shaky side today. So yes, so that's essentially what the main differences are. The other thing is that this one, I think, appeals to the masses more. People landmark this as one of the greatest rock albums, definitely rated one of the greatest rock concept albums of all time. Absolutely adore it for that. It makes a great kind of story. It can be told through stage, it can be told through movies, it can be told on just by listening to it. Where this one is not really a story at all. It's just a bunch of really solid, heavy tracks, but definitely rock stables for this band on tour. Always look forward to hearing all of these songs. Won't Get Fooled Again. It's got to be one of the greatest live songs of all time. Just so good, but much heavier, a much heavier album. So to me, that's the difference between the two. The funniest thing is this one started out as being a going to be great album and succeeded as going to be a great album, and this one started out as a completely failed album, and they threw something together and it's a great album as well. So it seems to me that the Who could almost not do anything wrong at this point in time as far as their music goes. As far as their individual lives and their performances and the life they were leading, they seem to be in constant turmoil, but that constant turmoil created so much fantastic music. To me, one of the greatest rock bands in history cemented themselves in history with this album, and cemented themselves in my history with this album. So those are the big differences to me. It's the same four guys, just a very different sound, I think on this album, Pete Townshend is now writing individual tracks, which he is so masterful at. So masterful. And their instrumental ability, you can tell by the time they got to this album, they were much better instrumentally than they had been in the 60s. They were getting better with each show and each album, but this one here clearly demonstrates their desire to get heavy with their music. This may be their heaviest album. In fact, I'm pretty sure it is. This is kind of magnus opus for their heavy albums, right? I wouldn't go as far as to call it heavy metal. It definitely has that hard rock sound down to a science, though. So to me, that's the difference between the two albums. Is there something I'm missing? Did I miss something that other people might have noticed? I mean, these are well produced as well. The sound on both albums is fairly good for the time period. You got some great guitar on both albums. John Entwistle's off the charts here on both, more so on this one, I think, than on this one. But yeah, it's just I just wanted to talk about the two albums and what the differences were and why they're both so great. So anyways, you have yourself a good day. Please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated, and we'll be back with another video later today. We're going to be doing the Psychedelic Snack, and Brother Murphy will be in for that. So take care. Have a good one. Bye.